little while since I've made one of these videos, hasn't it? As you can tell. This video, however, shall be but the first of a new collection. You lucky people. But in this time of national crisis, we're hearing certain words and phrases being bandied about willy-nilly, but in such a way suggests a certain confusion, or sometimes perhaps even entire ignorance as to the meanings and implications of these words and phrases. But I can help with that. I not only voted Remain, but I've taken to protesting with those guys outside Parliament. Mr. Stop Brexit, with the megaphone and the blue top hat, standing with placards behind people on the news. Seen him? His name is Steve Bray, and I try to help him.
Stop Brexit.
Yep. And whilst we're doing that, there are occasions when people of a contrary view, shall we say, are kind enough to share their opinions. There are things that keep coming up. I shall in these vids address a couple of these things. Let's deal first with the most frequently raised. When we're outside Parliament, we often have Leave supporters shout at us, "You do not respect democracy." But that claim is nonsense. Because as protesters, we are doing democracy. And democracy is best respected in the doing of democracy. Protest is one of the key expressions of democracy. Voting is a key expression of democracy too. Of course it is, but so is protest. The idea that protest is against democracy is wrong-headed to a degree that is obscene. How do you suppose that we know our democracy is healthy? Isn't one of the big indicators of a healthy democracy that we can protest? Isn't the repression of protest one of the factors that tells us that China is profoundly undemocratic? Many a Leave supporter, to be fair, confronted with this response, will concede that I'm entitled to protest, but they usually insist upon a caveat. Yes, you can protest, but you cannot change the decision of the referendum. By all means, campaign to go back into the EU once we've left, that's fine. But you must implement this decision first, because that's democracy. But this too is also utter rubbish. When a party wins an election and becomes the government, do the other side say, "Fill your boots"? Do they sit around drinking tea, doing the crossword? Do they just wait for the next election cycle to come around before doing anything? Is that what they do? Do they do that? They don't, do they? This is what actually happens. The second biggest party in the House becomes Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition. And the clue is in the name. They oppose, as do all the smaller parties. They set about frustrating the government's agenda at every turn, apart from perhaps a few bits and bobs of policy that enjoy cross-party approval.
Puppy cuddling for the OAPs. Oh, you can have that one. Hooray!
Aw, puppies.
They do not give the winning party, the government, a free pass to enact their manifesto. They certainly do not politely wait for each manifesto promise to be implemented. They are under no obligation to permit the implementation of any of the governing party's policies. Their job, what they are there for, is to make the government's job as difficult as possible to prevent, if they can, the implementation of government policy. This will be extremely difficult to achieve if the government enjoys a considerable majority. But then, in that circumstance, the majority of the country has decreed that the winning party's manifesto is pretty much just dandy, and we, the people, really, really want it. But if the government has a small majority, the opposition will often succeed in frustrating that government. And it is right and proper that they do so, because a tiny majority is the result of an equivocal mandate from the electorate. The country is not emphatically behind that government. The country as a whole has expressed an only qualified approval of that party's agenda. The government will likely get bits of its agenda through the House, but must expect to be thwarted in some of it. That is democracy. And it's messy. But it is designed to ensure that any changes a government might attempt are contingent upon a demonstrable will of the people as a whole. If that support for that government is not emphatic, then that government must compromise with the opposing views.
And the problem with the Brexit referendum result is that it was not won emphatically. Of course, 17.4 million is an impressive vote, but so is 16.1 million. And sure, the 17.4 beats 16.1, but not emphatically. That isn't a resounding victory. It's a squeak. It's 4%.
Therefore, a vote won by that sort of squeak is ripe for opposing. Indeed, if someone isn't opposing it in our adversarial parliamentary system, then something has gone badly wrong.
But then also factor in that the entire Leave campaign, from Farage to Johnson to Gove to Fox to Raab to Davis and everyone else who stood leading the Leave charge, all promised the country that there would be no difficulty in making a deal on leaving the EU.
We're now being told that we'll leave with no deal. The Leave lobby are now not even implementing their own manifesto. On the strength of a tiny majority, they are now threatening to do something they promised they would never need to do. They don't have a mandate from their 17.4 million voters to do something they promised they would never need to do.
That 17.4 million represents 52% of those who voted.
Yes?
Not of the electorate, because about a third of the electorate declined to vote at all. And I absolutely accept that people must get off their bums and vote if they want to be heard, so I'm not impugning that majority as a just majority. I'm simply pointing out another factor that makes that win less emphatic, which doesn't destroy that majority, it merely places it in a context that ought to have any actual Democrat worried. And anyone who says,
"The country has spoken,"
is just lying, because there are many British people, children most obviously, who did not qualify to vote, but are yet constituents of the country. No, what happened was that 52% of those who bothered to vote won a vote. They represent but 37% of the actual electorate, and only 27% of the British people. And they are now being used as authority to push a model of Leave that they didn't even vote for, because no one offered it during the Leave campaign. Indeed, there were express statements before the referendum, and there have been many more such statements since, that a deal of some sort would be readily attained, and that the model now being pushed, of leaving with no deal, would not be permitted to arise.
And so there must be, if we are a democracy, an opposition. It is admittedly fractured. There's been a failure of the party system, which means it's just a mess in Parliament.
But what we, the people who wish to remain, are doing, with our marches and petitions and vigils, is democracy. And what those MPs tabling motions and amendments in Parliament are doing is democracy. It is the Leave lobby who have attempted to suspend democracy, who have sought to quell the proofs of democracy, namely debate and protest, who indeed initially attempted to cut Parliament itself out of the debate, and now entertain the notion of simply closing Parliament down. The Leave project appears to depend upon suspending democracy. It is we Remainers who are doing democracy. What we are, who we are, what we do is democracy. We are not bandying the word around as a means to shutting down debate, but rather, we are doing democracy.
And democracy is best respected in the doing of democracy.
But